All righty. Well, welcome. As many of you will know, and a few may not, I'm Bob Wolf, and I chair SPICE. On behalf of the SPICE Committee and the SPICE Program Subcommittee, I'd like to welcome you to the first program in March. We have a great program in store for you today. Artistic representation of the Haggadah's four sons, brought to us by our own Rabbi Beth Nichols. Wednesday, March 17th, which is for us is not a St. Patty's Day celebration, I'm told. I will, but you don't have to. We have a great SPICE program online with Rabbi Yossi Groner, who will enlighten us on what I consider a really fascinating topic, the Kabbalah, one of the great traditions of Jewish mysticism. On Thursday, March 18th, from 10 a.m. to noon, we'll continue our effort to support the JFS Food Pantry with our semi-annual SPICE-sponsored food drive. This time, the emphasis is on ensuring that those Metrolina Jews who cannot afford the high prices of Passover food will be able to celebrate this holiday. So check the JFS website for food items in need and see this week's SPICE news for details, as well as Charlotte Jewish News, which just came in this morning, has some ads, articles, and materials on it as well. If you're not receiving our semi-monthly newsletter, let Tracy let her know, and she'll be glad to add you to our list. And be sure to check the TV website and the Celebrate Passover portal for a listing of all the wonderful Passover-related activities in concert with the Temple Bethel community. So special thanks, as always, to Nancy Glass and the SPICE Program Subcommittee, and as always, to Tracy, Natalie, and the rest of the TV staff, without whom none of this happens. And now, Rabbi Nichols.
All right, thank you. So it's wonderful to be back with you. And I am excited to kind of begin the Passover programming for the year with a discussion of the four children. So I am going to share my screen. The origin of this section of our Haggadah is that the Torah refers to or includes four conversations between parents and children where there is some reference made to the Exodus from Egypt. And it's important to know that these four episodes, in none of them is the child labeled in any way as the wise or the wicked child. It is just a child asks a question and a parent answers, or in one case, a parent just teaches their children something about the Exodus. The rabbis of the 2nd century took those four references and made them into this midrash of the four children, assigning them different types and taking the questions and sometimes using the answers that are in the Torah, but also sometimes adding in their own answers using citations from later texts, fitting with what they really wanted to be the message. So this is the beginning of that section from the Haggadah. I imagine it will sound familiar to many. The Torah alludes to four types of children. One is wise, one is wicked, one is simple, and one does not know how to ask. What does the wise child say? What are the testimonies, the statutes, and the laws which God has commanded you? You must tell this child some of the laws of Passover. We do not proceed to any afikomen, dessert, or after dinner celebrations after eating the Pesach lamb. So you can see in this first son, we have the quote from Deuteronomy is the instance from the Torah that they use. And then the answer, they actually ignore the answer given in the Torah and add their own answer from the Mishnah. What does the wicked child say? The wicked child says, what does this ritual mean to you? This child emphasizes the meaning of the Seder to you and not to the child's own self. Since the child excludes himself from the community and rejects a major principle of faith, you should set that child's teeth on edge and say, it is because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt, for me and not for him. For had he been in Egypt, he would not have been freed. So if we take the biblical question from each of these, we're going to go back a second and see that the wise child says, what are the testimonies and the statutes that God has commanded you? And in the wicked child says, what does this ritual mean to you? So they both say to you, but the rabbis of the Midrash only interpret the wicked child as emphasizing that you, and that's what they use to say he's the wicked child, right? Excluding himself from the community by kind of saying, what does this mean to you? And clearly not to me. So they're adding this layer to the Torah text that's not there. Our third and fourth children here. What does the simple child ask? What is all this? You should tell him it was with a mighty hand that the Lord took us out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. As for the child who does not know how to ask, you should open it for him, saying, it is because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt. So we have these four children, and I think I imagine that the rabbis who were writing this midrash were really getting themselves into the central purpose of the Seder, that the Seder is set up to be a teaching tool. It's set up to bring generations together and for the older generation to teach the younger generation about Passover. We have this formula of questioning, right, with the four questions. And here too, we have four children, three of whom ask a question and one of whom is just talked to, but asking questions so that dialogue can happen back and forth. Since the Middle Ages, the Haggadah has been a text that invited people to express themselves with it. As you know, we don't illustrate the Torah. So the Torah text is the Torah text, no matter when it was made. But the Haggadah does not have the same limitations of having illustrations. And so it became an opportunity and a place to express not only their own interpretations of the text, but to express their surroundings and their cultural experiences. So we'll see in the images of the four children, we learn not just about the four children, but we also learn about the time period of the people who were making these Haggadahs, their location, theological and philosophical and political views expressed through their art. The things I want you to look for as we go through these images are to notice the dress of the four children, the body language, what props are included, and how do the four relate to each other. In some cases, you'll see they're just four separate images, so they're not really relating to each other. In other cases, they're put together so that you can see a sense of how they're meant to be interacting with each other. I have put our images today in chronological order. So we'll see an evolution. This first one here is from Prague in the 16th century. It is a woodcut. And you'll notice first that the four children are adults, right? The four sons they are not children here. They are adults, except maybe we could say the child who does not know how to ask. And the order of them is from right to left. So we have, with the wise, a scholar of some kind. And that is a classic depiction of the wise son. And we'll see that in a couple more examples as well, that you have the wise son being a scholar, learned in some way. You can see here, he has his hands ready. He is actively teaching, in opposition to a classic representation of the wicked son, which is as a soldier. So over and over again, artists depict the wicked son as a soldier, and that's seen as an adoption of kind of the ways of the people around the Jews and not the Jews themselves, right? A proper Jew should be learned and studying, and the soldier is really adopting the European military culture around them rather than staying connected to the community. With the simple child, I'll just point out that he is pointing straight down. And I think that's the sense of when the question is, right, what is this? What is this ritual that you're doing? It's just kind of a simple, like, what is this? Without any depth to the question. And then we have the fourth child, the one who does not know how to ask, who is small, but kind of looks like an adult. So still that sense of expanding the notion of the 4 children to kind of 4 types of people and not just 4 different children. Any comments or questions on this one before we move on?
Yeah, I was just curious why they always talk about instructing the children, you and me, as opposed to when they talk about the collective, why isn't it us? This is how we celebrate the holiday, as opposed to this is how I celebrate it, in answer to you.
Interesting question, because you think that it would be us because you're imagining that you have a whole family around the Seder table. I also think, though, that the rabbis are focusing in on that responsibility of the father to teach their son. So it becomes me and you. And I think particularly with the wicked son, there's that notion of kind of the son being defiant to the father. And while it might be the son sees himself as defiant to kind of society, the father experiences it as a personal attack. So it becomes a you in response. All right, we're going to jump a couple of centuries to 19th century Haggadah from Chicago. And this really captures the American immigrant story in its illustration. You'll notice that the wise son and the parents are dressed in white, which is traditional for Passover, and that the other 3 are all in black. So we have that color distinction. The wise son and the parents seem to be kind of detached from what's going on, while the wicked son is controlling the head of the table and is dressed in more modern attire. He's leaning back in his chair, which I think is so funny. As a teacher, I know that always drives us crazy when kids are leaning back in their chairs. And who knew that in the 19th century it would already be a sign of a rebellious kid is leaning precariously back in his chair and smoking. So we have him pointing, kind of accusing his parents of something, it looks like. And what's interesting about this one to me is that the simple son and the one who doesn't know how to ask seem to be focused on the wicked son. They are kind of drawn to what he's saying. And while they're not being portrayed in a negative light, you get the sense that they're just kind of going along. And there's that fear of assimilation for them as well. Any comments or questions on this one? All right. This one is from Budapest, 1924. And I just want to comment that more than half of these images are from the Haggadah called A Different Night by Noam Zion. It includes in it a gallery of different images of the 4 children. So many of them are from that Haggadah. This one does not have any context for us, right? The 4 are in separate boxes. There's no props, there's no outfits. So we really have to rely on the facial expressions and also the hands. What are their hands doing and how are they connected to their face? And also the age. Some of the depictions of the 4 children really put a contrast in ages, that the wise son is kind of the oldest and on down. So we have here the wise one who seems to be kind of deep in thought, seriously concerned about his question of what are all these rules about, wanting to understand them. One explanation of this particular drawing also questioned if it was a woman. The person could be kind of feminine in the illustration. We have the wicked son who looks a little bit younger, and has that really mocking expression with the raised eyebrow. And then you keep getting younger as you get to the simple son and to the one who doesn't know how to ask. The simple one just looking kind of overwhelmed with wonder at what he's hearing, and the one who doesn't know how to ask just a kind of a blank stare. When you first glance at this one, you might think it should be older than it says it is, but this particular artist really adopted many of the characteristics of illuminated manuscripts from the Middle Ages, even though he was a 20th century artist. This was made, it says Poland 1939. The artist actually didn't live in Poland anymore at that point, but he probably made his Haggadah images between 1934 and 1936. It was then published in 1939, beginning of 1940, when he had gotten to Great Britain. So if we think about the context of this, this is really a commentary on Germany and what is happening in Europe at this point. So the wise son here is kind of the stereotypical yeshiva boy, which in many communities at that point, a young man who was studying full time was considered kind of the aristocracy of the Jewish community. So he's kind of well dressed and is the kind of wise, knowing, observant one. We then have the wicked son here, so it's the top left corner, who is assimilating, trying to fit in with the modern European look. You'll notice that he has a Hitler-like mustache. And apparently the first drawings that this artist did for his Haggadah included swastikas on a number of images, including on Pharaoh's soldiers. But the publisher in 1939 did not want to attract attention and made them scrub out all clear references to the Nazis. But you see really an opportunity to express political beliefs and understandings through these drawings of this 2nd century Haggadah text. The simple son here is the bottom right-hand corner, and is, in this case, simple is interpreted as kind of a religious part of the community, kind of simple, overweight guy who doesn't have a lot of sophistication, but is there and part of the community, versus the one who has, who can't even ask a question, who looks kind of as a rugged, worker, but not having any clear Jewish identification. Any comments on that one before we keep going?
Rabbi, what's the Hebrew above each picture? What's the translation?
The Hebrew is the name of the son. So under each picture is the title of which son it is, and then up at the top it says Arba Abanim, the 4 sons. So it's just identifying each of them, which is helpful because I will say some images sometimes they are not labeled, and you have to really think about which one, not knowing which one is which, but these are labeled for us. Any other comments or questions? All right, we're going to go from 1939 to 1955 and in Israel. And this is a illustration from a kibbutz Haggadah that really captures the kind of triumphant spirit of post the establishment of Israel and the socialist pioneer values. So the wise son, the top right-hand corner. Well, first to just orient you to this, you have the sun, and then you have the objects on the other side are meant to be the responses from the parent to the question. So the wise son here is appears as an adolescent, looks like he has some Jewish identity, but not overtly religious or observant, and it fits with that idea of the young adolescents who really were helping to found the state of Israel, and who had kind of Jewish nationalism versus a really Jewish religious identity. And even in his answer, when they, if the question is, what do all these laws and commandments mean to you? The answer is in these traditional Jewish objects, but ones that connect you to history, to Israel. You'll notice there's actually a lulav and an etrog in the objects that are answering the wise son, which we know have nothing to do with Passover. They're for the holiday of Sukkot. But I think help us connect to that in Israel at this time, it was about reconnecting to the land, and that our Judaism, we can connect to our Judaism through a connection to the land. These are species that are going to be growing in Israel, versus the spiritual reason for the lulav and etrog. It's more about the agricultural and land connection. And we have the 7-branch menorah, which connects us back to Jerusalem and the temple. For the wicked son here is, a city boy, maybe the capitalist. And if the wicked child's question is, what's the purpose of all of this avodah? And in Hebrew, avodah can mean worship and ritual, which is usually how this question is interpreted. So then what's the purpose of all this ritual that you're doing? But avodah also means work. So I think in this case, they're taking it as the kind of city boy asking, what is the point of all this hard work that you're doing, right? And the Zionist response of, look at all this work that we've done to set up, to make things grow in the desert, to set up stockades and keep us safe. And so moving away from the Passover story and more about reclaiming our freedom and land related specifically to Israel. With the simple son, the top left-hand corner, the response to what is all of this, instead of imagining Israelites pouring out of the Red Sea, we have Israelites pouring out of the immigrant ship, right? Making the exodus from Europe and returning to the land, with that same idea of us escaping slavery and going to Israel. We are escaping Europe and coming back to Israel. And then we have the one who doesn't even know how to ask. And this is a real comment about the tension among that still exists, of course, among secular Israelis and ultra-Orthodox. That in our previous images, the ultra-Orthodox scholar was often the wise son. Here, that same kind of image has become the son who doesn't even know how to ask the question. Or perhaps a commentary suggesting they don't even, if you are ultra-Orthodox, you don't even know to ask questions. You just go along. And the questions that they're suggesting that they should be asking are about the land. Here's this wheat and birds, getting to know the land of Israel. And also the book here says Sefer Hada'at, the book of knowledge. And this would have been a time period when Israel was really working hard to develop what their secular education system looked like, which wouldn't have included the ultra-Orthodox. So in this one image of the 4 children, and even the title of 4 Attitudes to the Zionist Dream, we get a sense of the politics of the artist. Any comments or questions about that one? Okay. We're going to stay in the same time period, but jump across the water to well, this says Europe and US. I think this one was done in the US. And the title here is Clashing Cultures. So we have the wise son as the learned rabbi again, and the wicked son here as the communist revolutionary, looking a little bit like Leon Trotsky, attacking the Ten Commandments with an axe. We have the simple son on the bottom right, who is assimilating and a gambler, a smoker. And then the child who does not know how to ask as a kind of nondescript, maybe worker, right? There's kind of dark clothing, looking blank, but doesn't seem to be a particularly negative image, but in contrast to, I think, the wicked son and the simple son, who there's some real commentary there on the part of the artist. This one from 1960 shifts a little bit to an exercise that I actually think that I've done with kids before, of trying to assign an animal, or you could do objects or personalities to the four children. And so here we have the wise son as the owl, the wicked son as the snake, the simple son as with the sheep, and then the one who doesn't know how to ask is with the goose, but fast asleep. So a sense of removing it from the political and more about kind of personality of the children. And even in how their body language is, that the wise son is kind of open and gesturing, whereas the wicked son has his arms crossed and is not open to whatever is being said to him. This one here is from 1963 and uses instruments. So the last one we had animals assigned to the four children. Now we have instruments assigned to the four children. So the wise son on the left is, again, the kind of classic image of a religious Jew or scholar, but here the shofar is added. And the shofar appears in our text as heralding the Messiah. So we have this wise son kind of capturing that image of Passover, and especially the end of the Passover Haggadah, as hopeful for the future, versus the wicked son, who is almost robotic in how he's depicted with armor, and going from the shofar, which has these expressions of hope, to a drum and a real military image. So again, that kind of classic that the wicked son is associated with being a soldier. The simple son here is playing some kind of horn, and is connected to the character of Noah. One of the adjectives given to Noah in Genesis is tamim, which is simple. So in that case, in Noah, it's used more as pure and righteous than we think of simple as not knowing anything. But it's brought into the image here with that dove above his head. And then with our child who does not know how to ask, you see an age difference again, that we seem to have kind of three adults and then a child by the time we get to the one who doesn't know how to ask. And he's playing some kind of rattle or maracas, which I think is implied here as not needing any knowledge to be able to do that. You'll notice he also doesn't have any shoes on. So a contrast to the well-dressed wise son on the left, who might even be wearing the priestly breastplate, if that's what that circle in the middle is meant to be. All right. From the very specific we get to this contemporary image from 1982 of that's really starting to express the idea that some people are uncomfortable with the labeling of children as fitting into one or the other. And so they depict each of the children as having all four colors. So there's a dark orange, a light orange, a darker blue, and a lighter blue. And so each child has some of each color in them. So an idea that all four children, all different ways of asking and approaching things are inside of each of us. This one here from 1988 is from a Haggadah that was specifically put together in memory of the Holocaust. So they're taking, a play on us being the people of the book, that the wise son is the book that has words on it, is open to be learned. The wicked son, tradition and kind of Hebrew is just being burnt up there, and I think kind of a chilling connection, particularly because it's in a Haggadah in memory of the Holocaust, of the idea of books being burned, of people being burned, that the tradition is kind of going up in flames, and connecting the idea of the wicked son to that same concern about Judaism disappearing. We have the simple son, who's an open book, ready to be taught things, but not having the knowledge yet. And then the one who does not know how to ask, the closed book, which relates back to the text itself, where the phrase that's used about how the parent should talk to the one who doesn't know how to ask, is that you should open him up to Passover. So it's interesting to have this book that's closed and suggesting we can open up the book, and that's how to reach that specific child. I wanted to include a gam here. This is a gorgeous, gorgeous Haggadah, so I encourage people to seek it out. And it doesn't add so much new to our understanding of how the four sons are being depicted, but is just a beautiful piece of modern art. A gam is still using the classic wise son being a scholar, the wicked son being some kind of soldier. And then if you look at the symbols above their heads, the wise son has a book, and it says Tanakh, so the Bible. The wicked son has some kind of weapon. The simple son has just these circles. So I think of them almost as like open circles ready to be filled. And then the question mark for the child that does not know how to ask. This one from 2015 is from a Haggadah that is made, I'm not sure if it's made every year, but made many years, where they ask artists from all over Israel to each take a page of the Haggadah and illustrate it. And I want to open it up for this one and ask people, what do you think this artist is suggesting about the four sons by her use of this drawing? Any thoughts on what it's implying? You can just unmute yourself and share with us, because I can't see all of you at the same time on Zoom.
They're all leaning over as if to listen.
Great. Okay, so in the posture of having asked a question and waiting for an answer. Thanks, Sarah.
Where's the fourth?
Judy.
Where's the fourth son?
The fourth son, he gets cut off, and in the Haggadah himself, he's cut off too. You just see the top of his head here at the bottom.
Okay, I don't have my glasses on.
Okay, so you only see, he's so far bent over that you don't see the top of his head. Yeah, Judy, go ahead.
The issue with the fourth son, he can be so young that he cannot ask. But yet I remember that even when our youngest was young, we brought him to the table, had that youngest in a high chair, fully knowing he really not going to understand, but he was there anyway.
Smart.
Well, and it's interesting because they go so quickly from not knowing what they understand to being that, 3-year-old who all they do is ask questions.
Right.
Beth,
Yes, go ahead, Michael.
there's a lot of interpretations here that come to mind. For example, on the bottom, the wise son, he is the smallest.
No.
They're all leaning over, but they're
So they're labeled, and the wise son is actually the one at the top
the wise son is the one at the top.
with the glasses.
Okay.
Yes.
But the other thing I would say then is that their facial expressions sort of give away some of the context that you've talked about.
Mhm.
The wise son has got glasses. He, I don't know, seems to adopt a more pious approach. Clearly, the wicked son is angry. That's an angry face that you can see.
Speaks the obvious.
Huh? Say it again.
Go ahead, Michael.
And the simple son, who is in the bottom, has some degree of bewilderment on his face. I'm still wondering why the difference in sizes. Is that supposed to depict ages or some kind of respect or humility or what? The other thing about the wicked son is his fingers look like claws. So it's clear, and he's all black. So clearly the middle one is a very good depiction of what you've been talking about. I'm not so sure about number 3. That's it.
So one of the things that I wonder about this one is whether the faces look very similar to me. So I wonder if the artist was actually imagining that all 4 sons are the same person. And whether it's as he ages or as he kind of rises up and pays more attention, he goes through the different stages of not knowing how to ask, being interested but kind of a blank slate, that rebellious phase, and then that engaged, wise posture. So because the faces are so similar, it led me to think maybe it's the same person. Janice, I saw your hand up.
Yes, I'm sorry, I had trouble unmuting. Well, what came to my mind, which it doesn't really make sense, but you have the one who doesn't know how to ask on the bottom, and it's like he's supporting the weight of all of the other 3 brothers, even though he's the one who doesn't know how to ask. So I don't know if the artist realized that they were showing this or even meant that, but that's what I first saw when I looked at it, is that the one who doesn't know how to ask is actually the support of all the others.
Interesting. That also says to me, maybe not the support, but being weighed down by the others, that the one who doesn't know how to ask, that child in a group has to listen to the answers that are given to all the other children because he hasn't even asked a question. But I think one of the things the Haggadah is showing is, just in the idea of the 4 children, is that you have to figure out how to reach that specific child as well, and not just kind of fill the space with the answers to the others. And so here, so weighed so far down that you can't even see his face.
So Rabbi, I was thinking.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Yvette.
Oh, that's all right. That made me think about maybe this is also symbolic of a progression. Out in life, you have no idea what to ask. Because you don't, and then you're simple, and then maybe you are a little evil, because toddlers certainly are, and then you get wise because you're educated.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Instead of progression, it looks to me as the word would be evolving. And if you take a look at it from small, medium to large, it's almost like a blossom opening up. So you go through all these stages until you can become a wise person. And these are the necessary stages that we all go through until you reach that pinnacle, whatever that pinnacle is. So it's an evolving process.
Well, and seeing it as evolving, I think is so helpful to think about, because it prevents us from saying, you know, this child is the wicked child, but instead, or the wise child, but instead seeing it as an evolution that we might each have all of these in us at different points. Bob?
Yeah, I just, first of all, I'm 75 years old, and it's the first time I've ever thought about it as not 4 separate children. Thank you for that. And I think the artist supports that. It's the only one that we've seen really where they're not 4 separate panels or 4 separate areas of the panel, and they're really totally integrated. So I think that really kind of lends to your theory there.
Thank you.
I
Judy?
sort of see it that there's a possibility of another way, as if the child at the bottom was drawn first, and then each other child sort of chimes in and says, no, it pushes the previous one down and says, no, like I may be more important. And the other one comes in and pushes them both down and says, no, listen to me. And then the wise one comes in and says, no, I'm the authority. They're all below me.
Well, and also in terms of what those children are asking for, you know, I think about for a teacher having to remember that you shouldn't just target in on the wise child who asks the detailed questions, because you still have all these other children that aren't ready for that kind of an answer yet. Judy Jacobson, I think you were.
I am. I was listening to Good Morning America this morning. They had Michelle Obama, and she was touting her book, Becoming. And in that, becoming is our evolution. And she's now rewriting it, I think, for younger children. But she said we're always evolving. We are always becoming. And this would just fit in perfectly.
Thank you. All right. We're going to move on to the next one. Not too much to discuss here, but I just wanted to show a reminder of kind of modern needs that we should, they don't have to be boys. So we have different genders here. And this is a Haggadah from 2018. It's designed for families. But again, you see some of those same ideas that of age, that the one who doesn't know how to ask here is an infant. So of course he doesn't know how to ask yet, he doesn't talk. And they're also labeling them differently, as instead of wicked child, the rebellious child, and instead of doesn't know how to ask, just the quiet child. So I think using terms that may be more reflective of stages of life than of personalities. And then I brought you a pandemic one. This is a pandemic depiction of the 4 sons. They're not labeled, but I think we can say that the wise son is on the top left with the glasses, and I almost imagine the plant. It's somebody who's, you know, used the pandemic to start up a new hobby of growing things. And then we have the wicked son whose window is raised. So kind of with that smirk of not quite following the rules. And then I think the simple son is with the purple curtains, and the one who doesn't know how to ask with the question marks on the clock. But just a reminder that you can use these distinctions really to apply to anything. So I'm going to stop sharing, and then, yeah, Judy. Oh, Judy, you're still muted.
Maybe we need to start reading the Haggadah backwards and starting with the 4th question first, and then the evolution, because we start with the wise child. Maybe we should start with the 4th one and then go up. I'm thinking of like with Sunday school, at temple, you obviously present the story differently to the kindergarten than you do to the high school student. Mm-hmm. So just a funny thought.
Well, and I think that's but the idea of presenting it differently to different ages is such a key part of education, and recognizing that kids of every age and every type can learn all the same subjects, but you have to, you know, cater it to where their level is.
But maybe in past times we thought that the 4th question about the one who doesn't even ask that's a terrible thing, but he can't ask because he's not capable at that point.
Right. Well, and I love the answer in the Haggadah of you have to open it up for him. Right. You have to, it's putting the burden on us to spur the child's interest.
So even though he doesn't understand the Passover Seder when maybe he's 1 or 2, but it certainly behooves you to have him at the table. And it starts it.
Great. Jeffrey, will you explain a little bit more your comment that you put in the chat?
Hi, it's Janet. It's not
Janet.
Jeffrey. I'm recovering from surgery, so I prefer not to be in the view of the camera, so to speak.
No problem.
I was thinking both in terms of growth when we were looking at the bent over children. Well, not children, but it can also be anyone who's incapacitated in any way. My mentally distanced uncle many years ago, once we brought him to the table, you know, there was the knowledge that was brought with him. We gave that to him. So whatever you can do to increase that knowledge, you bring him closer to the wise son. And you should never compare the wise to another child because each one of us is different. So I thought of it as a growth and an expansion of our time frame as people. And it kind of tied it into the second comment that I made, that the illustration can also be, you know, the different stages where we're bringing them different empathy. And the more you teach them and the more you bring them to the table, you don't know what they're actually learning, but you're hoping that they're getting something, and they always do.
Thank you. Sarah.
I was wondering, with these illustrations, were they significant to the themes of those Haggadahs?
A couple of them were, in terms of, there was the specific one that was the theme of in memory of the Holocaust.
Right.
Most of them, though, were just the Haggadah that was made at that time period. I think it was probably the 20th century when we started having a lot more Haggadahs that were thematic and not thematic to Passover. Like, I was disappointed that the one that I had been thinking of to see if there was an image didn't have any pictures, but I have a Haggadah from the 80s about Soviet Jewry, right? So that there were specific Haggadahs made to represent what the Jewish community was thinking about at that time. So in some cases you have those, then the illustrations are specific to that. But in other ones, it's just a Haggadah that was made at that time. But I think the artists use, you know, this is an opportunity for them to express how they understand the Passover story, because part of the Passover story is if we're putting ourselves into the experience of coming out of Egypt, how does that relate to what we're experiencing now? And then we get some of those natural connections of seeing what is the Exodus of today, or what is the slavery of today? And in each generation, the answer would be different.
Are the artists the same artist as the whole Haggadah?
For some of them, I'm not sure, because a couple of them were from a collection of pictures of the 4 children, so I don't know what the rest of the Haggadahs look like. The Israel, the one at the end with the 4 sons kind of bowed down, that one in particular, it's not the same artist. This was the Haggadah where they have a different artist put together every page. So it's an amazing Haggadah to look at, because it goes from cartoons to realism to you know, all different types of art all through one Haggadah. Or Milt.
One of the big takeaways for me, as was mentioned by Bob Wolf as well, was the realization on the possibility with some of the artist rendition that these are all one person. And that's the involvement of the child. And that takes away any level of criticism, let's say, to the bad child or the simple child or anything like that, because it's all just one thing. And the parent's responsibility to guide that child into his adulthood and to make it as best as possible for them. So that was a big realization through the artist rendition for me.
Yeah, to continue that too, it always has seemed to me a little snarky, the response to the rebellious child, because an adult should know better. And viewing it as just a natural stage of development, which today I think many of us for the first time thought about.
Yeah.
Thanks to you.
That's
It makes it a little less legitimate to always make my brother read that one, but
yeah.
I might still keep making him.
Yeah, Sandy had a comment.
I've seen in one of the Jewish museums in Manhattan, they had personal haggadahs where the family made their own. I thought that was interesting. I don't remember if it had any illustrations or not.
Some of them.
Yeah, I think some of them might have.
Maybe that'd make a great project for next year.
It's the museum and all the way.
The Jewish Museum in Manhattan on 90th.
Yeah.
No, it's the one all the way downtown.
Okay.
It's the one where you can stand there and
The
see.
Museum of Jewish Heritage.
Yeah.
Yeah, Museum of
Maybe
Jewish
we
Heritage.
can make a family Haggadah project for next year for the temple.
Be interesting to
Well,
see, right, to ask different families to illustrate different pages.
I know one member of our temple has done that. He shared his family one that he made with me. He goes to Torah study with me.
And you'll actually see the resources that will be coming out on the Gateway. We'll have some links to there are websites now, haggadot.com is one of them, that help you make your own Haggadah. And they have kind of all of the different pieces that other people have used in theirs that you can compile. And there, as Sarah mentioned, the thematic Haggadahs are tons of different Haggadahs connected to television shows. That I know that there a Mrs. Maisel Haggadah came out last year, that connected to television shows or to superheroes, or geared towards comedy or towards being short, all different kinds. Natalie just mentioned Harry Potter one. Natalie, there were a number of 4 children Harry Potter images that I found, but I must confess that my Harry Potter knowledge was not sufficient enough to be able to interpret the choices of the artists. But really, so many different ways to illustrate them. And I think to help us think about what is our responsibility as adults to be teaching the people at our table, and depending on thinking about how are they approaching this Seder, are they approaching it with detailed questions or with general questions? Are they looking to connect to the meaning or connect to to learn a specific piece of it, that people approach it with different kind of mindsets, and that we can tailor what we're doing to try to reach each of them, since our role with the Seder is to help each person experience as if they were each coming out of Egypt. So thank you very much. Before you break into your breakout rooms, I'm going to make one more announcement on behalf of the staff. You have hopefully seen in your email that we are doing a push in the month of March to connect with our community, and spearheaded by Rabbi Klass and by Natalie. On March 12th, we are hoping to deliver a challah to every member of Temple Bethel. In order to accomplish that impressive feat, we need more bakers and more drivers. So if you are willing to bake some loaves of challah or to drive and deliver challahs to people's houses on that day, please do check out our website and sign up. They are, we really would be so excited to be able to pull this off and celebrate Shabbat kind of all over the Charlotte area with each other, knowing that everyone has a challah. So Bob, I'll turn it back to you.